Today's topic is one of those ones with 1,000 hot takes, but, a lot of them are a little bit adventurous. Let's talk about dry brushing. Okay, let's talk about dry brushing. My aim today is going to be to go over some of the what's, whys and hows as to where dry brushing is good, where it's effective, where it isn't effective, where it can become the basis for some other techniques, or where it's best to maybe just try something else. I'm going to be going over quite a few different takes on dry brushing, how to utilize it, a lot of different sort of textural types that it works with. So let's get on with it. Let's not waste any time. Let's talk about dry brushing. Okay, first of all, before we dive in, let's briefly talk about the brushes themselves. For dry brushing, we want flat or round-nosed brushes. We want them to be very soft. We generally want them to be fairly big, although, having a small one is definitely handy. So for this, the most cost-effective solution I've found is cheap makeup brushes. They work really, really well for me. Although I do also love the smushing brushes from Rosemary & Co. And if you want a slightly more expensive, but a bit more luxury alternative, those are a really good way to go. Okay, one of the first things I want to talk about is a bit of a pitfall when it comes to dry brushing, and that is Space Marine Power Armor. We often see dry brushing as just a kind of fast and dirty way of getting a highlight onto a miniature, and so the temptation can often be there to just sort of smash a dry brush all over a Space Marine and call it done. As we can see here, this isn't a super successful approach. Problem here is that the dry brushing misses a lot of the key areas where we'd want to highlight. It has quite a sort of furry, fluffy look, and a lot of the places where it does hit, a lot of the edges, especially things like, say, shoulder pad trims, obviously not as applicable on this example I'm showing, but those are areas that we're going to paint over anyway, so it can be a bit of wasted motion. Not really the best approach for this Space Marine's Power Armor. However, there's nothing to say that we can't still use dry brushing to achieve some nice volumetric highlights on the Space Marine's Power Armor by building up lots of layers. This is using more of a smushing technique where we approach slowly, we change colour constantly, building up and building up and building up, and we use that soft fluffiness almost as a sort of blending technique to apply some nice volumetric highlights to our Power Armor. You're going to want to be building up here sort of 4, maybe 5 slow layers of colour, just applying them on top of each other, shrinking them each time. Now, shrinking those layers and getting them precise with dry brushing can be very, very difficult, and it's for times like this where having a small dry brush is really, really handy. And as you can see, sticking with this and building it up nice and slow does net a pretty cool result. Now, admittedly, this was just an ultramarine that was already sprayed in Macragge blue. I probably should have put some pre-shading on before I showed this because that would have given us a bit more contrast, but you can kind of see where it's going. You can see what it's going to look like. It's a really nice technique and it has kind of a unique stylistic finish, something that is, very much its own thing. If you want to see more miniatures painted in this style, Kirioth on YouTube does a lot of this kind of painting and has some amazing success with it. Check out his channel, I'll link it in the description below. Okay, so with wide open shapes that have got deep crevasses like the jacket of this old Hammer Delac Heavy, it can be really tempting to just smash a dry brush across them, maybe building up, 1 or 2 layers of colour just to give a bit of highlight, a bit of variance, but not always going to net you the best results. As you can see here, it looks kind of rushed, kind of messy. We probably could have got better results by using a different technique. That's not to say that it's a complete failure, but it doesn't really achieve the intention of creating a nice highlighted look to this jacket. That said, using build-ups of dry brushes like this, especially in black and grey, can be a really good basis for filtering over to get a nice kind of dirty, crunchy, sort of worn leather look. In this example, we can use those greys just with a few thinned down applications of Wildwood contrast paint, and that's going to start to build up and just tint everything to a nice brown tone. Once that's in place, we can add some nice little scratchy bits of texture with, say, some XV88 or, another tan colour. You could modify this as well using, blues, reds, greens, whatever, if you were working with different colours. And that lets us enjoy a super quick, really, really easy to do, battle ready leather jacket that honestly is absolutely fine for, most of your sort of quicker paint jobs. You certainly could take far more refined and careful approaches to this, but the dry brush here does help us get something that's quick and easy to get on the battlefield that looks a little bit better than if we just sort of rushed through some edge highlighting, for example, which probably wouldn't look great because that's a technique where doing it quickly really hurts it. Minis with very busy, very tight texture, like the fur for example on this beastie, can really, really benefit from dry brushing. After a few layers of built up dry brushing, not only do we have really, really nice contrast on the fur itself, but the fluffy texture that dry brushing leaves behind actually works really well for simulating the short hair parts of the animal as well, which allows us to apply it all over and get an effect that at least is something we can work with. Again, this is brilliant for fast sort of battle ready miniatures, but you could also then start adding some refined strokes, especially to that short hair, over the top of this if you wanted something a bit more careful and a bit more classy looking. So this could form the great basis for a more high-end kind of workup, but it's also a really nice, quick and simple way for miniatures like this to get them looking battle ready. Finally, this is my favourite example of where dry brushing really, really benefits us. Miniatures that have a lot of deep set texture, but it's not as busy, it's not as tight as it might be on something like, say, fur. This Tyrannid Swarmlord is a perfect example of this. This is a miniature where it was made for dry brushing. We have lots of constantly changing features for our brush to pick up on the edges of, but they're really deeply sculpted, so we're not going to be in danger of accidentally getting some stray dry brush into a shade area and having to rework all of that all over again, and that is a bit of a pain in the arse when it happens. With miniatures like this, I do prefer to go back to that sort of more smooshing style of dry brushing. That's hard to say, smooshing style. That more smooshing style of dry brushing where we build up layers slowly and we add on, getting brighter and brighter so that we've got lots of control and we can slowly use that sort of fluffy texture almost as a blending technique. This also allows me to have close control over how bright I want certain areas because I've got a very slow build up going on. So I can pick and choose the areas where I want to draw people's attention to. This is particularly helpful for large miniatures like this Swarmlord, where I'm going to want to pull people's attention more towards the face and the center mass because it's such a big miniature, it's kind of hard to take everything in at once. So that's my take on dry brushing. When it's good, when it's bad, and when we should maybe think of it more as part of an overall workup rather than a kind of catch-all or standalone solution. Dry brushing is a great technique with some awesome applications, and it's a crying shame, to my mind at least, that we often think of it as a lazy technique or a cheats technique or a beginners only technique. There are a ton of more complex and refined things that we can use dry brushing as part of, but we have to think of it as an integral part of our arsenal. We have to know when it's good and when it's not good, what sort of miniatures it's going to benefit us on, what sort of miniatures it won't, and if we're using it on a miniature where it doesn't really benefit, but we're trying to use it, to do something a bit different or because it's a technique that we really enjoy, then we also have to know how to manipulate it to make it work for us. So I'd love to know, what are some of your favourite applications for dry brushing? What are some of the things that you use it for? Let me know in the comments below and we'll have a chat about that. Of course, don't forget that if you liked this video, you can hit that thumbs up button and you can subscribe to the channel to get notifications on when I am releasing new content here on YouTube. If you really love the content and you want to support the creation of it, you can get a ton of really cool benefits by signing up to my Patreon. There is also a link below in the description to that. And so, with all of that said, it's time for me to get out of here. I'm going to roll those end credits, thank my existing Patreons, and I will see you in the next one, everybody. Bye bye, and thanks for watching.